talk about. Just a little bit of background: managing director of Island Records, in charge of over 100 million album sales. They've shaped the modern economy, and he's going to give a chat about his life and what he's done, the rights and the wrongs, who he has signed, who he hasn't signed, and he's passionate about African music, deeply passionate about African music. He signed the Bundu Boys, he signed Angelique Kidjo, Baba Mal, and various other acts that he'll talk about. And he's involved in Amapiano. He knows Amapiano, he knows what it is, and he had a funny word. He says it all seems to sound the same coming out of South Africa. Look at what we signed at Island Records, all these different artists, all these different genres, the Ronnie Jordans, the PM Dawns, the 9 Inch Nails, etc., etc. I'm going to leave him to talk about that, but then tomorrow as well, he's brought artwork. Go on to Instagram, Marc, M-A-R-C, M-A-R-O-T. Please follow the man. There's a story about David Bowie that Trevor has also worked with, but Marc is talking about augmented reality. I know how to spell the word. I don't know how to make money out of it, and when you have a look at what he's doing with augmented reality on Instagram and the art world that he's involved in, it's eye-watering. What is possible and what is not possible. So that talk's going to be tomorrow about augmented reality. He's brought pieces here to show us what augmented reality is. So I think that's going to be incredibly fascinating. But he asked me to play this song before he came on, so I have to listen. Anything But Common, former managing director of Island Records, and has become a dear friend. A warm round of applause, Marc Marot.
I think I'm going to shake off my nerves with an anecdote before I begin the story. So I quit Island Records in 2000 after 18 years of working there, and I've started a management business, and one of my first clients is Richard Ashcroft and the Verve. Do you remember Bittersweet Symphony? And Richard is a very lovely but awkward character. The enemy has dubbed him Mad King Richard because he was just completely bonkers. And he was actually a pleasure to work with, but also sometimes very difficult as a personality. And I remember being on the road in Germany with him, where we had a fantastic tour, and we were in Mannheim, and we performed a show where it was one of those electric nights where everything went sublimely right, and you could feel the audience was alive, and Richard was on it, and it was kind of makes the hair on your arms go up, and it's really amazing. And afterwards, we were in the Mercedes van, driving back with the crew and with Richard, and we got to the hotel, and there were maybe 100 girls on either side of the thing leading up to the hotel, and Richard is like, he puts his dark sunglasses on. It is of course midnight, but he puts his dark sunglasses on. And for the first time in ages, he decides that he's going to get out of the van first. So he doesn't wait till the end. So he picks up his guitar, and he steps out into this phalanx of beautiful young women who are screaming. Door opens, Richard steps out, and it goes quiet. Because Justin Bieber is staying in there. so Richard kind of just his sunglasses, he's got his guitar, and he walks into the hotel lobby. And to the right is the concierge, to the left is reception, and the lifts are on the other side of the koi carp pond. So he steps into the koi carp pond and starts walking towards the lift. And all the girls are all going like, and he starts walking, but he doesn't realise that it gets deeper. And he's got his guitar, and he's going like this, and then he's going like this, and he's going like this. And then he puts the guitar on his head. Luckily it bottoms out. He gets to the other side, gets in the lift, goes up, and the next morning I get a call from the hotel though to say that he's set fire to the duvet, he's smashed the telly, he's put cigarettes in the bespoke fitted furniture, and he's let them all burn so that there are burn marks all the way down. And that's the rock and roll life that that I kind of have grown up with, you know, where sort of a bonkersness is part of it, and without that madness, you also don't get the brilliance of it, you know. But I'm going to talk a bit about my life at Island Records, and in a way, it's an unattainable story now, in my opinion. But there's lots of things about the journey that is going to be of resonance, I hope, to young people in the audience and people that are on their own journey. I started as a musician. Common People was actually quite appropriate, really, as an opener, because in 1979 I played the 3rd ever Glastonbury as a musician. So I played in the courtyard of Worthy Farm, which is, you know, and Michael Eavis took me to go and see the Pyramid Stage being built at the stage. It didn't open for another 3 years, in fact, the Pyramid Stage. And then years later, I went, the Stone Roses pulled out of Glastonbury at the very last minute, and Pulp were off at the Sunday night closing shot. And I flew in on a helicopter, it was so wonderful, landed at Glastonbury, sat on the mixing desk and watched 85,000 people sing every word of Common People, and it was the most hair-raising experience where you think, oh my God, I can't say I've done that, but you can say that couldn't have happened without me. That's a different thing to saying I've done that, but it was just the most amazing experience, and I will come on to Pulp and why I think they're quite special in my story. So my story started as a musician, and I know that the theme of making your own luck and taking advantage of luck when it happens to you is really important. But in many respects, it's basically part of the theme is about looking for the opportunity in everything that ever happens to you. And as a musician, I used to have to make a living, because even though I was doing sessions and I worked for people like Tim Rice and all sorts of people, in reality I was a gardener. So I was digging gardens. And I picked up a very debilitating illness, which at first they thought was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then eventually they found out that it was quite a rare thing at the time, which is well known now, which was toxoplasmosis. But it made me so sick that I had to give up being a musician and give up being a gardener. But then looking for the opportunity in that led me into the music industry, because I had to sort of change my thing, and my dream of being, I was going to cure the world with my weeping guitar. That was what I was going to do. And I couldn't do that. So I got a job working for a small music publishing company which specialised in film music. So we had 2 of Trevor's great rivals, Carl Davis and George Fenton, amongst our coterie of writers. But we also had Henry Mancini and some amazing American composers. So that's really where the beginning of my love of film music started, was working at Eton Music. So I took the illness and seized the opportunity from the illness to start working. And during my time there, we worked on a film score of Carl Davis's for a movie called Champions. I won't bore you with it, but there was a song with Elaine Page singing it. I came up with a solution to exposing it. It was about horse racing. I got the BBC to fly her to Aintree, to the Grand National. In front of 20 million people, she sang the song. It was a hit. And then Island Records came looking for the person that did that, and it was me. So that's how I got headhunted to join Island Records. What they didn't know about me was that I was a massive Chris Blackwell fan, and I really knew everything about him. Chris Blackwell was the founder and owner of Island Records, and probably one of the most important fathers of the modern music industry as an independent alternative record maker, as a producer as well. And so I got this dream job of working for his little publishing company, Blue Mountain Music, which was an unusual company because it was his personal company. There were no shareholders. Island Records had shareholders and investors and things like that, but this was his personal baby. But the trouble was that I'd been given that job by somebody who had no authority to give it to me. And so I'd accepted the job, I'd resigned from my old post, I was waiting to start, and Chris Blackwell gave the edict that everybody in the company except me knew to get rid of me. So I was supposed to be fired, and nobody, the guy who had employed me didn't have the balls to do it. I didn't know any of this. Everybody else was keeping stum. And eventually I got summons to meet Chris in his house near Reading in the UK called Thiel. And I went out to Thiel, and I'd already spent 2 months working for Blue Mountain at that stage. And what I'd done was I had tracked down every one of the 22,000 songs that Blue Mountain owned. So I actually managed to source physical records and buy the stuff and basically understand the catalogue. And I had gone through the songs, and I'd worked out this one was right for Cher, and I'm going to send this one to Tina Turner, and Paul Young, who's at the time, he needs to hear this song. And I went to Chris not knowing that I was going to be fired. And I had my Rolodex of all the songs that we owned and my notes of what I intended to do with them. And not knowing I was going to be fired, I sat down with Chris and I just went through my enthusiasm. I was, what, 23 years old at the time? And Chris said, look, this is a big conversation, why don't you stay the night? So I had dinner, and then I stayed in one of the guest houses at the place, and he was spinning records for me at 3 o'clock in the morning in his little DJ booth, you know. And I'm with one of my utter heroes, who is just, you know, who I think, I don't know, it got me there to fire me. Anyway, on the Monday morning, I arrived back at Blue Mountain. I hadn't been fired. And I got a call from John Leftley, who was the accountant. He said, you had a good weekend, didn't you? And I said, John, how do you know that? He said, because Chris has appointed you managing director and he's doubled your salary. And it was like, what? This is easy. I should go next weekend. And that was the beginning of my life with Chris Blackwell. And there were some, and this is why I'm saying it's not necessarily replicable, you know, because there aren't that many great independents. So they are out there, you know, it's fantastic XL and Domino Records. I'm talking about UK record companies, but there aren't that many of them anymore. And I think that Chris saw in me, my family's from Mauritius, so it's part of the African diaspora. And Chris is obviously from Jamaica, and my father was a white Mauritian, his father was a white Jamaican. And I think he saw, we were both kind of public, he was major public school, I was minor public school, but I think he saw me in him, but 15 years younger or 20 years younger than him. And he took me under his wing in the most extraordinary way and mentored me. And I can now look back on it and realize that it was a proper mentorship. It was not formalized. But there was never a moment that I spent with him where he wasn't teaching me about how this happened or that happened or whatever. And the interesting thing is that his very, very well-received book came out, his autobiography came out this year. And there's kind of not a story in there that he hadn't told me about the intricate details of, you know. So every inch of his life had been taught to me. But the most important lessons were really about character in music, and if you're an aspiring musician, this is an important message to be had out there, is that years ago, I'd had my first, no actually, I hadn't had any success, actually, other than Trevor and probably Angel Heart by that stage, is that I was put in a position where there was a really hot band. So we're at Duran Duran stage here in the world. This is what's going on, this is what's hot. And this was kind of like a hot analogue of Duran Duran. 5 really good-looking boys, but more than that, they're Cambridge first-class graduates. And they've been on the front cover of the Sunday Times Culture Supplement without a record deal. They're the hottest band in the UK, and they're good-looking boys. And they're pretty arrogant with it, and they know it. And everybody, every record company in the world is after them, and every publisher in the world is after them. But they like me. And I'm running Blue Mountain Music. Blue Mountain Music has an investment budget of £50,000 per year at that stage. That's all we can invest in talent. But the band was called the Roaring Boys, and the Roaring Boys deal was £200,000. And everybody had matched that. So this is £200,000 in 1984. Okay, so we're talking millions of pounds now. Comparable. But they had chosen me and said that if you can match it, it's yours. So I flew to New York and I sat with Chris, and this was one of the most valuable first lessons that I ever learned, where I said, Chris, you know, this is the hot band. There's the colour supplement. It's real. Look, this is how hot this thing is. And he said, okay, I'll back you. I'll back you. If this is what you want to do. But he said, but you have to tell me that you really love this. And I said, well, I wouldn't listen to it at home, but it's the hottest deal in the world. And he said, you sure you're not in love with the deal? And you're sure you're not in love with the fact that you've won the deal? Or is it because you love the band, that you love the music and you respect where they're going? And I said, well, I wouldn't listen to it at home. And he said, okay, I'm backing you, but I want you to fly home thinking that this is a career killer. If you sign this band and it fails, you're done. Because you're cooked. You're radioactive. You know. But if it succeeds, then congratulations, that's fantastic. He said, but if I were in your position, I'd go home and I'd find something that you really, really love, and that's what I would sign. So I flew home on the flight, and I thought, actually, I really wouldn't listen to this at home. It's very good. I know it's good. It feels like hits. I know it's good. And I flew home, and I had to ring them up and say, I'm backing out of the deal. And they signed to Virgin. And they failed utterly miserably, failed completely. And about 2 weeks later, I signed this little band called Colorbox that was signed to 4AD Records, tiny little indie. I put them together with AR Kane. They created Pump Up the Volume, and I had a #1 in 16 countries. And that deal cost me £15,000. Compared with a career killer iceberg that I was about to hit halfway across the Atlantic. And Chris Blackwell taught me the first of many, many lessons about being in love. And he also, with the music, but he also, part of that thing with the Roaring Boys in New York, when I played him the tracks, he said, do you listen to the radio? And I said, yeah. He said, stop listening to the radio. Stop. He said, you're being influenced by decisions that were made 3 years ago. You need to be thinking about what people want to hear in 3 years' time, and not think that the Roaring Boys sounds just like Duran Duran. That's going to work, because that decision was made 3 years back. That single was written and mastered 2 years back. You know? And that was, again, one of the lessons where he started teaching me effectively, in particular, about part of the history of Island Records, which was our interest in character and difference. So how, in every respect, he was interested in things that stood apart from the crowd, not alongside the crowd. And it's one of the things that I find quite difficult now about the modern state of music, is that because we're in a world of instant feedback in terms of social media, is that it is much easier if you sound like everybody else and you're pretty good to get liked than it is if you sound completely different to everybody else, because that means that a public needs a bit of an education. But Island Records was all about the education, effectively. So, you know, we started investing. I mean, we'll talk about Island's investment in black music for a second. You know, it's easy to talk about the big ones like U2 and the Cranberries and Robert Palmer and Steve Winwood and these amazing big successes that we had over the years. But in reality, we started as a Jamaican record label, and the investments were in people like Lance Hayward doing jazz records, you know, at the beginning of, and it went into later years where Chris eventually discovered Bob Marley and did an amazing thing where he really trusted Bob, and he did something that was quite unique and is acknowledged in Jamaica, and that is that he gave cash, $4,000 to Bob, and said, go away and record an album. And nobody had recorded a reggae album. It was a tracks-based business, and it was a jukebox-based, physically, jukeboxes all over the island. And Chris said to Bob, I think that you can make an album of 10 tracks or whatever, 12 tracks or whatever it was. And everybody at Island thought Chris had just given this wee ganja smoking Rasta $4,000 that was just going to disappear. And then of course he came back with the masterful first album. And effectively a worldwide superstar and legend was launched on the back of the hunch of believing that this man could make a difference to the world. It wasn't just a gamble on his music, it was a gamble on his message as well, because Chris believed and understood his message already from the very beginning of working with Bob. And in a way, that was part of the journey of Island Records, was to try and find characters that were different to everybody else that was in the world. And there's often actually good reason for doing that, and it's quite difficult to say, but in my era, I had been so inculcated by Chris, I'd been so indoctrinated by this concept of trying to find different people that had a different voice and a different perspective on the world, that when I got the job running Island Records, I kind of had to clean out all of the stuff that I just didn't think was working, and then I had to retool and effectively start rebuilding. But I recognized in myself my own weaknesses, and my particular weakness at the time was the fact that I had for 8 years run music publishing companies, and with music publishing companies you're not selling anything directly to consumers mostly. You're a B2B business, you're a collection agency business, you're a rights business. But suddenly I was given this toy called Island Records to run. And I had to learn how to sell shit, and that was a very difficult thing. So I surrounded myself with people that were in the same position as me. I was 30 years old, 29 years old when I got the job, and at 30 years old I decided that what I would do is that I would look for all of those 30-year-old guys and girls that had hit the glass ceiling within Mercury Records or CBS Records or Virgin Records, and I'd pull the best of them in. They had experience in making records and selling records and marketing records and everything else. And I just put this fantastic team together, and I think that was one of the first things that I did that was right in the business. And then we started retooling. But I need to talk about why we got to that point. The trouble was that Chris was a distracted man, and he acknowledges this in his book, is that he'd got into the film industry. And he is restlessly intellectual, restlessly interested in other disciplines. He bought 11 hotel spaces in Miami alone, on South Beach in Miami. And he was getting interested in developing hotels and boutique and special and artistic and studios inside and model agencies on the first floor, and really clever stuff. But he got interested in the film industry, and we'd created a film distribution business in America, and the first 3 films that we had were Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It, Oscar winner, and we did Kiss of the Spider Woman, William Hurt movie, Oscar winner, and we did a film called Trip to Bountiful, Oscar winner. We won 3 Oscars in our first year of operation. But the reality is that they were what was called negative pickups. We didn't make those films, we bought them. So we effectively, they were all distressed properties. So Spike Lee's first movie, he got to the end of the process, and guess what, Trevor? There was no money for music! And all of those 3 films had the same thing. They came to us because there was no money for music, which is what film companies always do. They forget the music. It's the end. It's the last thing they put on. Oh shit! We've got to put some music on. Trevor!
It's not making sense.
So we won 3 Oscars, and oh my God, that's good for your confidence. So then we started making films. Oh dear. Very different. The first film was Chris's girlfriend at the time, Nathalie Delon, who was quite a well-known actress in France. And she made a film called, they call it An Accident, was the film. And the Variety review was, they call it a film? And that was like $5 million. The next film was called Good to Go, and that was on the Washington Go-Go scene, which was brilliant. We'd signed Trouble Funk and Reds and the Boys, and fantastic music coming out of it. And we tried to make a movie about a music movement that hadn't really kicked off. It was great, vibrant, but that was $6 million. And I sat next to Chris, watched this film, and Chris turned to me and he said, "That's a demo. I know what it's supposed to look like, but that's a demo." And that was another $6 million. So that's $11 million on our two first film productions, which were utter disasters. And the point being was that we had squandered U2's royalties from the Joshua Tree in making them. So we owed U2 that money. And it was money that we had used as cash flow to make movies, thinking that we had, or Chris thinking that we had some kind of divine right to being successful in a way. And that really led to disaster. We had 3 sublime hits in the same period. So obviously the Joshua Tree had been 15, 16 million seller for U2 as an album. But then we had Addicted to Love for Robert Palmer, his biggest single in his entire career. We had Higher Love for Steve Winwood, biggest single in his career. And we had Slave to the Rhythm for Grace Jones, biggest single in her career. And each of them took the opportunity to leave us at that moment. So it was literally a complete coincidence that each of those 3 massive worldwide hits coincided with the end of their contracts. And of course, you know, what major label would not want Robert Palmer after Addicted to Love, or Grace Jones after that? So we lost 2 to EMI. So we lost Robert Palmer and Grace Jones to EMI, and then I can't remember where Steve Winwood went, but they all left. And all we had left was U2, in reality. Because we had wonderful artists like Tom Waits, but they were never going to make the money. So all we had left was U2 and a great catalogue. And U2, we'd spent all the money. So we were in deep shit, in reality, that's the fact. And again, I'm not betraying a confidence, that's in Chris's book. We effectively, Chris realised that he was going to have to sell the company because it was the only way that we could keep the thing alive. And so we sold it. It was sold to Polygram. And a magical thing happened for me, which was that in that manoeuvre, I was appointed managing director of the company. And in effect, I was given carte blanche because the company actually was in really poor state. The UK roster was appalling. We didn't have much left, and so I was effectively given carte blanche to break it down and remake it, which was just the most extraordinary experience to have. But I also had a blessing, which I now look back on and I think it was extraordinary, which was, if you imagine that Polygram, which is owned by Philips, at the time they owned, they owned Decca Classics, Philips Classics, Deutsche Grammophon, Vert. That's just in the classics and jazz. They owned A&M, Mercury, Polydor, Def Jam, Motown. I mean, when you look at what they had, and I was the only person in the world that didn't report to them. So I didn't have to report in to Alan Levy and David Munns, who ran the Polygram Worldwide. I reported to Chris Blackwell. And so I was given this toy where Chris had kind of fooled me into thinking I owned it in the nicest possible way, but trusted me enough to kind of get on with it. But I learnt so much from him about character and the nature of character and the nature of the kind of artists that needed to sign to the label, that I was able to carry that message into every signing. And what I mean by that is that if A&M Records was signing a new band in the UK, they would have to fill out forms. How much are you going to invest in recording? How much are you going to invest in marketing? What's your video budget? What's your photography budget? What's your break-even point? When do you start making these forms of effectively bureaucracy? And mine with Chris would be a fax to him to say, I'm going to sign this band called Pulp. It's a bit contentious because There are some people in the company that really don't want to sign them because they think Jarvis is too old, but I really fucking rate them. I think they're fantastic. They relate to all the art rock that we've ever done. The reason I want to sign them is because they rate to the they rank with Tom Tom, and they rank with Roxy Music, and they rank, and I could list the things of art rock that had been on the label, and Chris was like, fantastic, they sound great, you know? Tricky, I could track Tricky back to Bob Marley, you know, if you know that first incredible Tricky Max and K record. And any number of the artists, even PJ Harvey, you could take it back to, even back to Nick Drake, even though she was slightly different genre-wise, but you take it into Fairport Convention and the folk history of island records as well. And so my job was very different to the managing director of A&M, who would have to sort of prove the break-even point. Mine would be, how is this enhancing the logo? What are we saying here about the record label? And that's a very